The radio crackled with desperation at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness of the forward operating base like a blade through silk. Broken Arrow, Broken Arrow. This is Viper 6. We are taking heavy casualties. Request immediate close air support. Grid follows. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Jake "Hammer" Morrison, a SEAL team leader whose reputation for ice-cold composure under fire was legendary throughout SOCOM. But tonight, something had shattered that composure entirely. In the Tactical Operations Center, Colonel Patricia Reaper Voss leaned forward in her chair, her weathered hands gripping the radio handset. At 52, she had more combat hours than most pilots half her age, but the tremor in Morrison's voice sent a chill down her spine. She had worked with Hammer's team before. These were operators who didn't break, didn't panic, didn't call for help unless the situation had deteriorated beyond all reasonable hope of survival. Viper 6, this is Groundhog Base. Copy your Broken Arrow. What's your situation? Reaper's voice remained steady, professional, but her gray eyes reflected the gravity of those two words. Broken Arrow, the most dreaded call in military operations, indicating that a unit was about to be overrun and annihilated. The response came fragmented through heavy static and the distant thunder of explosions. Groundhog, we've got approximately 200 Taliban fighters, high ground on 3 sides, RPGs, heavy machine guns. We're down to 12 effectives, surrounded in a valley approximately 15 clicks northeast of your position. A massive explosion erupted through the radio, followed by ominous silence. Viper 6, respond, Reaper commanded, but only the hollow whisper of static answered. She turned to her operations officer, Major David "Tank" Rodriguez, whose dark face had gone ashen. What assets do we have airborne? Tank consulted his board with practiced efficiency. 2 Apache gunships are already committed to Operation Steel Rain, 30 minutes out from RTB. F-16s from Bagram are 45 minutes minimum. We've got 1 A-10 on standby, but... He hesitated, his expression troubled. But what, Major? It's Callahan, ma'am, Captain Luna Callahan. Reaper's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Luna Ghost Callahan, the pilot who had been the subject of whispered conversations and raised eyebrows since her arrival at the base 3 months ago. 28 years old, 5 feet 4 inches of barely contained intensity, with dark hair always pulled back in a regulation bun, and eyes the color of storm clouds. She was technically proficient, her flight records were exemplary, but something about her made the other pilots uneasy. The radio suddenly crackled back to life. Groundhog Base, this is Viper 6. We are combat ineffective. Estimate 15 minutes before position is overrun. Whatever you're going to do, do it now. Captain Luna Callahan stood motionless beside her A-10 Thunderbolt II, the massive twin-engine aircraft looming in the darkness like a sleeping predator. The Warthog, as pilots called it, was not a beautiful machine by conventional standards. Its angular fuselage, stubby wings, and prominent nose-mounted GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon gave it the appearance of something designed purely for destruction rather than grace. But to Luna, it represented something far more profound than mere machinery. She ran her gloved hand along the aircraft's titanium armor plating, feeling the cold metal beneath her fingertips. Each panel told a story of survival, of missions completed against impossible odds. The A-10 had been designed during the Cold War with a single purpose: to destroy Soviet tanks and survive in the most hostile environments imaginable. It could fly with half its wing missing, return to base with its engines shot out, and keep fighting even when conventional wisdom said it should fall from the sky. The summons from the operations center had come with typical military efficiency. No explanations, no briefings, just Captain Callahan, report to Colonel Voss immediately. But Luna had seen the activity around the base, the hushed conversations between senior officers, the way the maintenance crews suddenly moved with urgent purpose. Something significant was developing, and her instincts told her she was about to be thrust into the center of it. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, her dedicated crew chief, appeared from beneath the aircraft's belly, her flashlight casting dancing shadows across the tarmac. Santos was a 15-year veteran whose expertise with the A-10's complex systems bordered on the mystical. She could diagnose problems by the sound of the engines, predict maintenance issues weeks in advance, and had an almost supernatural ability to keep aircraft flying under conditions that would ground lesser machines. "She's ready, Captain," Santos reported, wiping hydraulic fluid from her hands with a well-worn rag. "Full load of 30mm, mixed HEI and armor-piercing. Maverick missiles on stations 3 and 9, full internal fuel. Whatever you're planning to do out there, she'll get you through it." Luna nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the mission briefing. She had learned long ago not to speculate about operational details, but the base's heightened state of alert suggested something far beyond routine patrol duties. The A-10 community was small, tight-knit, and she had heard whispers about increased Taliban activity in the northeastern sectors. "Any word on the mission profile?" she asked, though she knew Santos wouldn't have specific details. The crew chief shook her head, but her expression was troubled. "Nothing official, ma'am, but I've been around long enough to recognize the signs. This isn't training and it isn't routine." She paused, studying Luna's face in the dim light. "Captain, whatever they're sending you into, bring yourself and my bird back in one piece." Luna felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders, like an old, comfortable jacket. The Tactical Operations Center buzzed with controlled tension when Luna entered, her flight suit crisp despite the early hour. Colonel Voss stood before a large tactical display showing topographical maps of the northeastern region, her expression grim. Major Rodriguez worked frantically at a communications console, coordinating with multiple agencies simultaneously. The air in the room felt thick with urgency and barely contained desperation. "Captain Callahan," Colonel Voss began without preamble, "we have a SEAL team in immediate danger of being overrun. 12 operators surrounded by approximately 200 Taliban fighters in a valley 15 kilometers northeast of our position. They have maybe 10 minutes before their position becomes untenable." Luna studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating distances, fuel consumption, and weapon effectiveness. The target area was mountainous terrain, perfect for ambushes but terrible for close air support. The enemy would be well entrenched, probably with anti-aircraft capabilities, and the SEALs would be dangerously close to any ordnance she might deliver. "Weather conditions?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. "Marginal VFR, scattered clouds at 8,000 feet, visibility 3 miles in haze and smoke. No significant winds aloft," Rodriguez replied, never looking up from his console. Luna nodded, absorbing the information. Visual flight rules in marginal conditions meant she would be operating right at the edge of acceptable parameters, but the A-10 had been designed for exactly these circumstances. The aircraft's excellent low-speed handling and robust construction made it ideal for close air support in challenging conditions. "What about enemy air defenses?" "Intelligence indicates small arms fire, RPGs, possibly some crew-served weapons. No confirmed SAM sites in the immediate area, but assume they have manpads," Voss replied, using the military acronym for Man-Portable Air Defense Systems. The colonel turned to face Luna directly, her gray eyes reflecting decades of combat experience and the weight of command decisions. "Captain, I'm not going to lie to you. This is a high-risk mission with minimal margin for error. Those SEALs are depending on close air support to survive, and you're the only asset we have available in time to make a difference." Luna felt the familiar flutter of pre-combat nerves, but her voice remained calm. "Understood, ma'am. What are my rules of engagement?" "Weapons free on any target that poses a threat to friendly forces. Use your best judgment on ordnance selection, but remember those SEALs are in close proximity to enemy positions." Voss paused, studying Luna's face. "Captain, these are some of the finest operators in our military. They're counting on you." The words hung in the air like a challenge and a benediction combined. Luna straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility and the familiar surge of purpose that came with dangerous missions. Luna's boots echoed against the concrete as she strode back toward her aircraft, her mind shifting into the focused intensity that preceded combat operations. The pre-flight routine became a meditation. Each switch and system check a familiar ritual that prepared both pilot and machine for the deadly ballet ahead. The A-10's engines spun up with their characteristic high-pitched whine, a sound that had become synonymous with salvation for ground forces across multiple theaters of operation. "Ghost Flight, Groundhog Tower, you are cleared for immediate departure, runway 27. Contact approach on button 2. The tower controller's voice crackled through her headset with unusual urgency. "Groundhog Tower, Ghost Flight, rolling," Luna responded, advancing the throttles and feeling the Warthog lumber forward with its characteristic ground-hugging stance. The aircraft might not win any beauty contests, but its purpose-built design radiated lethal capability. As the runway lights blurred past, Luna felt the familiar transformation that occurred during the transition from ground to air. Below remained the world of politics, personalities, and petty concerns. Above waited the pure realm of physics, tactics, and life-or-death decisions. The A-10 lifted off smoothly, its twin engines providing the reassuring thrust that would carry her into combat. "Ghost Flight, contact approach, heading 045, climb and maintain 8,000, came the next radio call, directing her toward the northeastern mountains where 12 American warriors waited for salvation or witnessed their final moments. Luna banked the aircraft toward the rising sun, its rays painting the rugged Afghan landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere ahead, in a valley she couldn't yet see, professional soldiers were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. The familiar weight of responsibility settled across her shoulders, but this time it felt different, heavier, more personal. Her radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood run cold. Any station, this is Viper 6. We are down to 8 effectives. Enemy is preparing final assault. If anyone is out there, we need help now." The voice belonged to someone who had accepted death but refused to surrender. Luna keyed her microphone, her voice cutting through the static with quiet authority. "Viper 6, this is Ghost Flight. I'm 5 minutes out. Hold fast, we're coming." She didn't mention that she was alone, that she was just one pilot in one aircraft against 200 enemy fighters. Some truths were better left unspoken. The response came immediately, filled with desperate hope. "Ghost Flight, Viper 6. Never been happier to hear a woman's voice in my life." The mountains rose ahead like ancient sentinels, their peaks shrouded in morning mist and the smoke of battle. The valley revealed itself gradually as Luna descended through scattered clouds, a natural amphitheater carved by centuries of geological patience and now serving as a deadly arena. Smoke rose from multiple points across the rugged terrain, marking the positions where explosions had torn into earth and stone. Through her targeting pod's infrared display, she could see the heat signatures of muzzle flashes scattered across the surrounding ridgelines like deadly fireflies in the dawn darkness. "Viper 6, Ghost Flight. I have visual on multiple muzzle flashes around your position. Can you mark your location?" Luna's voice remained professionally calm despite the tactical nightmare unfolding below. The SEALs were positioned in what appeared to be a dried riverbed at the valley floor, while enemy positions commanded the high ground on 3 sides. A textbook killing field that any military academy instructor would use to demonstrate how not to conduct operations. "Ghost Flight, we're in the Wadi at grid November Golf 426891. We have IR strobes active. Enemy positions are approximately 200 meters up the slopes on our north, west, and south. They've got us bracketed pretty good down here." Luna adjusted her targeting pod, and immediately spotted the faint infrared signatures of the strobe lights marking friendly positions. The SEAL team had established a defensive perimeter in what limited cover the dried riverbed provided, but their situation was tactically hopeless without immediate air support. Enemy fighters moved with practiced coordination across the surrounding slopes, their positions indicating a well-planned ambush that had successfully trapped one of America's most elite units. Viper 6, Ghost Flight has your position. I'm going to make gun runs on the northern ridge first, then work clockwise. Keep your heads down and stay in that riverbed. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon represented 7 barrels of concentrated destruction, capable of firing 30mm rounds at a rate of 65 per second. Each round weighed nearly a pound and could penetrate armored vehicles at ranges exceeding a mile. Against personnel targets, the weapon's effectiveness bordered on the obscene, but Luna felt no qualms about bringing such overwhelming firepower to bear. The enemy had chosen to fight American forces. Now they would discover the consequences of that decision. Banking into her first attack run, Luna felt the familiar narrowing of focus that accompanied combat operations. The world reduced itself to target acquisition, wind compensation, and the precise moment when her crosshairs aligned with enemy positions. Her gloved finger found the trigger, and the A-10 shuddered as the massive cannon came to life. The sound of the GAU-8 firing resembled a giant zipper being opened at tremendous speed, a distinctive BRRRRRRT that had become legendary among ground forces who had witnessed its effects. 30mm rounds walked across the northern ridgeline like the footsteps of an angry god, each impact creating small explosions of dirt and stone. Luna watched through her heads-up display as muzzle flashes disappeared along her gun run, the enemy fighters either killed or driven to cover by the devastating fire. The A-10 pulled through the bottom of its dive, climbing back toward attack altitude as she prepared for the next pass. Ghost Flight, Viper 6. Outstanding work on that northern ridge. We've got movement on the western slope now. Looks like they're trying to flank our position. Luna banked hard left, bringing her aircraft around for another attack run. Below, she could see Taliban fighters moving through the sparse vegetation on the western slope, their advance temporarily disrupted by her first gun run but not completely stopped. These weren't untrained militia. Their tactical movement and coordination suggested experienced fighters who understood how to operate under air attack. Viper 6, I see them, coming around for gun run on western positions. The second attack run proved more challenging as the enemy had learned from the first. Many fighters had taken cover among the rocky outcroppings that dotted the mountainside, making target identification more difficult. Luna adjusted her approach angle, using the A-10's excellent slow-speed handling to maintain visual contact with enemy positions while lining up her shots. The cannon roared again, its distinctive sound echoing off the valley walls as high-explosive rounds detonated among the rocks. She could see secondary explosions as ammunition and equipment were destroyed, but the enemy return fire remained heavy. Green tracer rounds arced up toward her aircraft, most falling short but some passing uncomfortably close to her wings. Ghost Flight, you're taking ground fire. Recommend you vary your attack headings. Luna was already adjusting her tactics, approaching the next target from a different angle to avoid establishing predictable patterns. The A-10 had been designed to absorb significant battle damage, but there was no sense in giving the enemy easy shots. She rolled into another dive, this time targeting concentrations of fighters on the southern ridge who were attempting to bring heavy weapons to bear on the trapped SEAL team. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the desperate radio call had crackled through the night, the initiative was beginning to shift. Luna felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from successful close air support, but she knew the enemy would adapt quickly to her presence. The next few minutes would determine whether 12 American warriors lived to fight another day. The Taliban fighters proved more resilient than Luna had hoped. Despite two devastating gun runs that had eliminated dozens of enemy positions, the remaining fighters continued their coordinated assault on the trapped SEAL team. Fresh muzzle flashes appeared along the ridgelines as reinforcements moved forward to replace fallen comrades, and the volume of fire directed at the American position showed no signs of diminishing. Ghost Flight, Viper 6, we're still taking heavy fire from all quadrants. They've got us pretty well boxed in down here. Luna checked her ammunition counter. She had expended approximately 40% of her 30mm rounds, leaving her with enough for several more gun runs. But the enemy's rapid adaptation to her attack patterns meant she would need to vary her tactics significantly. The A-10's durability was legendary, but even the Warthog had its limits when facing concentrated small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades. Viper 6, Ghost Flight. I'm going to employ Mavericks against concentrations on the northern ridge, then continue with gun runs. How's your ammunition situation? The pause before Lieutenant Commander Morrison answered told Luna everything she needed to know. Ghost Flight, we're running low on everything. Maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire left, then we're down to sidearms and harsh language. The admission struck Luna like a physical blow. These were Navy SEALs, operators who carried more ammunition than most infantry squads and were trained to make every round count. If they were running low after less than an hour of combat, the intensity of this firefight exceeded anything in her previous experience. She selected one of her AGM-65 Maverick missiles and began the targeting sequence. The electro-optical seeker head displayed a magnified view of the northern ridgeline, where she could clearly see enemy fighters moving between defensive positions. The Maverick was designed for precision strikes against armored vehicles, but its 125-pound warhead would be devastating against personnel targets in the open. Viper 6, danger close. Maverick inbound on northern ridge. Luna squeezed the trigger, feeling the slight kick as the missile separated from her aircraft's pylon. She watched its white exhaust trail arc down toward the mountainside, knowing that in seconds the enemy's tactical situation would change dramatically. The explosion, when it came, was impressive even by military standards. An orange and black fireball that rose several hundred feet above the ridgeline, followed by the rumbling thunder of the detonation. Holy shit, Ghost Flight, outstanding. You just took out about 20 of them with that one. The effect on enemy morale was immediate and visible. Luna could see fighters abandoning their positions along the northern ridge, some running toward the back slope, while others sought deeper cover among the rocky terrain. The tactical situation was evolving rapidly, but Luna realized she faced a fundamental problem. Her fuel state was becoming a factor. The A-10 was fuel-efficient by fighter standards, but combat operations at low altitude consumed significantly more fuel than cruise flight. She had perhaps 20 minutes of combat time remaining before she would need to consider returning to base, and the enemy still outnumbered the SEAL team by at least 10-1. Viper 6, Ghost Flight, what's your assessment of enemy strength? The response came amid a burst of automatic weapons fire. Ghost Flight, we estimate 150 to 175 remaining effectives. They're well-armed, well-coordinated, and they don't seem interested in breaking contact. I think we stumbled into something bigger than a routine patrol. Luna absorbed this information while lining up another gun run. The numbers were sobering. Even with her successful attacks, the enemy still maintained overwhelming numerical superiority. She could continue to inflict casualties, but unless something changed dramatically, the SEALs would eventually be overrun through simple attrition. Banking into her next attack dive, Luna made a decision that would haunt military analysts for years afterward. Instead of conducting hit-and-run attacks from safe altitudes, she would bring the fight down to the enemy's level, using the A-10's legendary durability to maintain continuous pressure on their positions. It was tactically sound but personally suicidal, exactly the kind of decision that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. The A-10 descended toward the valley floor, its twin engines roaring as Luna prepared to demonstrate why the aircraft had earned its fearsome reputation among ground forces worldwide. Luna pushed the A-10 into a steep dive that would have been impossible in most aircraft, the Warthog's massive wing area and powerful engines allowing it to maintain control even at extreme angles of attack. She was now flying barely 300 feet above the valley floor, close enough to see individual enemy fighters scrambling for cover as 30mm rounds chewed through their positions with mechanical precision. Jesus Christ, Ghost Flight, you're danger close to everything down here. Morrison's voice carried a mixture of awe and terror as Luna's cannon fire erupted just meters from the SEAL positions. The low-altitude attack proved devastatingly effective, but drew immediate response from every enemy weapon in the valley. Green tracer rounds crisscrossed the air around Luna's aircraft like a deadly light show, several impacts sparking against the A-10's armored fuselage. She felt one particularly heavy hit somewhere aft of the cockpit, followed by a minor vibration through the control stick, but the aircraft continued flying normally. "Taking hits but still flying," she reported calmly, though her heart rate had elevated significantly. The A-10 had been designed to absorb battle damage that would destroy other aircraft, but there were limits to what even titanium armor could withstand. Banking around for another pass, Luna noticed something that made her blood run cold. Enemy fighters were moving down the slopes in organized assault formations, preparing for what appeared to be a coordinated final attack on the SEAL position. The volume of covering fire from the ridgelines had increased dramatically, suggesting that reinforcements were continuing to arrive despite her successful interdiction efforts. Viper 6, I'm seeing organized movement toward your position from multiple directions. Looks like they're massing for a final push. Copy Ghost Flight. We see them too. Estimate 4 minutes before they're in grenade range. 4 minutes. Luna checked her ammunition status. Less than 30% remaining, and her second Maverick missile. Once those were expended, she would be limited to strafing runs with her aircraft's secondary weapons, hardly sufficient to stop a determined ground assault by over 100 enemy fighters. She selected the Maverick and began targeting the largest concentration of enemy troops, approximately 60 fighters moving in a coordinated advance down the western slope. The missile seeker head locked onto the thermal signature of the group, its guidance system calculating the optimal impact point for maximum casualties. Danger close, western slope, Maverick inbound. The explosion was spectacular, a rolling fireball that engulfed nearly 24 enemy fighters and sent the survivors diving for whatever cover they could find. But even as she celebrated the successful strike, Luna could see that more fighters continued advancing from other directions. The mathematics of the situation were becoming increasingly unfavorable. Her fuel gauge now showed 18 minutes remaining, enough for perhaps 4 more gun runs before she would face the impossible choice between abandoning the SEALs and attempting a dead-stick landing at a forward airstrip. Luna keyed her radio with a transmission that would become legendary in special operations circles. Viper 6, Ghost Flight. I'm staying until this is finished, one way or another. The response came immediately. Ghost Flight, we copy, and ma'am, it's been an honor. Banking into what might be her final attack run, Luna felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a shroud. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of rotors. Perhaps the Apache gunships were finally returning from their previous mission. But for now, it was just one pilot, one aircraft, and the determination to ensure that 12 American heroes made it home alive. The A-10 dove toward the enemy positions once more, its cannon roaring defiance against the morning sky. As Luna completed her gun run, the familiar sound of rotor blades grew steadily louder, accompanied by a radio transmission that sent a surge of relief through her combat-strained nervous system. Ghost Flight, Blade 11. 2 Apache inbound your position, 5 minutes out. We've got full ordnance loads and plenty of fuel. The cavalry was finally arriving, but 5 minutes might as well have been 5 hours given the current tactical situation. Enemy fighters had reached positions within 50 meters of the SEAL team, close enough that Luna could no longer employ her remaining ordnance without risking fratricidal casualties. The mathematics of close air support had shifted decisively against effective intervention. Blade 1-1, Ghost Flight. Copy your inbound. Be advised, enemy forces are in close contact with friendlies. Recommend immediate coordination with ground element for target identification. Luna pulled the A-10 into a tight climbing turn, scanning the valley floor for targets of opportunity that wouldn't endanger the trapped Americans. Her ammunition situation was becoming critical. Less than 20% of her 30mm rounds remained, and she was rapidly approaching the fuel state that would force her return to base regardless of the ground situation. Below, the battle had devolved into the kind of close-quarters firefight that air power struggled to influence. She could see muzzle flashes from both sides separated by mere meters, the two forces locked in a deadly embrace that made external intervention nearly impossible. The SEALs had established excellent defensive positions in the riverbed, but they were being slowly compressed by the sheer weight of enemy numbers. Viper 6, Ghost Flight. Apache Flight is inbound with full loads. Can you mark the closest enemy positions with smoke? Ghost Flight, negative on smoke. We're too close to enemy positions. Any marker we deploy will land in their laps too. Morrison's voice reflected the desperate reality of their situation. We need something to break their momentum before they overrun our perimeter. Luna made a decision that violated every regulation in the close air support manual. She would conduct strafing runs at minimum altitude, using visual identification to engage individual targets while accepting the significant risk of ground fire at point-blank range. The A-10's armor had been designed for exactly this scenario, but flying at treetop level through intense small arms fire pushed even the Warthog's legendary durability to its limits. Viper 6, I'm going to make low-level strafing passes with visual target identification. Keep your people down. I'll be shooting danger close. She pushed the throttles forward and dove toward the valley floor, leveling off at barely 50 feet above the rocky terrain. At this altitude, she could clearly see individual enemy fighters, their faces visible as they turned upward to track her approach. The psychological effect was immediate. Many fighters instinctively dove for cover rather than maintaining aimed fire on the SEAL positions. The GAU-8 cannon erupted in short, precise bursts as Luna walked her fire across enemy positions with surgical accuracy. Each burst lasted only a fraction of a second, but delivered devastating firepower against personnel targets. She could see the effects immediately, enemy fighters dropping their weapons and fleeing toward the ridgelines, their coordinated assault fragmenting under the psychological pressure of close air attack. Return fire was intense and immediate. Luna felt multiple impacts against her aircraft, the distinctive metallic impacts of small arms rounds striking armored surfaces. Her left engine began running slightly rough, and she noticed a slow decrease in hydraulic pressure on her primary flight control system, but the A-10 continued flying with characteristic resilience. Taking hits but still effective, she reported, beginning a climbing turn for another pass. Below, she could see that her low-level attacks had achieved their primary objective. The enemy assault had stalled, with many fighters seeking cover rather than continuing their advance on the SEAL positions. The sound of Apache rotors was now clearly audible over the valley, accompanied by the distinctive whop-whop-whop that had become synonymous with American air superiority. Luna felt a surge of relief as she realized the cavalry had finally arrived in sufficient force to turn the tide of battle. But her fuel situation was now critical. Less than 10 minutes of flight time remained before she would be forced to land regardless of tactical considerations. Blade 1-1 Ghost Flight. I'm running low on gas and ammunition. Valley is yours." The Apache flight leader's response reflected the professional admiration that exists between combat aviators who have shared danger. "Copy, Ghost Flight. Outstanding work down there. We'll take it from here. You've earned your wings today." As Luna climbed away from the valley, she could hear the Apache beginning their own gun runs, their 30mm chain guns and Hellfire missiles bringing fresh destruction to the remaining enemy positions. The SEALs would survive, the mission would be considered successful, and 12 American warriors would return home to fight another day. But for Luna Callahan, the real battle was just beginning. Word of her actions would spread through military channels with the speed of gossip, transforming her from an unknown pilot into something approaching legend. The woman who had held off 200 Taliban fighters with a single A-10 would discover that heroism carried its own burdens, and that respect could be as challenging to navigate as combat itself. As her damaged aircraft limped back toward base, Luna felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that followed successful combat operations. She had proven something to herself today, though she wasn't entirely certain what that something was or why it had been necessary to prove it in the first place. The A-10 touched down at the forward operating base 43 minutes after takeoff, its left engine trailing wisps of smoke, and its fuselage decorated with numerous bullet holes that would become conversation pieces for maintenance crews. Luna's hands shook slightly as she completed the post-flight checklist, the adrenaline finally beginning to subside after an hour of sustained combat operations. Staff Sergeant Santos appeared at the aircraft's side before Luna had even shut down the engines, her experienced eye cataloging the battle damage with professional detachment. Multiple small arms impacts decorated the fuselage. One larger hole suggested a near miss from an RPG, and hydraulic fluid stained the concrete beneath the left wing. By any reasonable standard, the aircraft should have been shot down or forced to abort its mission. "Mother of God, Captain," Santos breathed as she began her initial damage assessment. "How the hell did you keep this bird flying?" Luna removed her helmet and ran her fingers through sweat-soaked hair, the physical toll of sustained combat finally registering as the immediate danger passed. "The Warthog kept us both alive, Sergeant. She took everything they could throw at her and asked for more." Colonel Voss approached the aircraft with an expression that Luna couldn't quite interpret, part relief, part professional assessment, and something else that might have been respect. Behind her walked Major Rodriguez and several other officers whose presence suggested that Luna's combat mission had attracted significant attention at higher levels. "Captain Callahan," the colonel began, her voice carrying the formal tone reserved for official business. "I need a complete debrief on your engagement. The SEAL team is secure, but I want to understand exactly what happened out there." The debriefing lasted 3 hours and covered every aspect of Luna's mission in exhaustive detail. She described her tactical decisions, ammunition expenditure, fuel consumption, and battle damage assessment with the precision expected of professional military aviators. But underlying the technical discussion was an unspoken question that everyone present understood but nobody quite knew how to articulate. How had one pilot in one aircraft succeeded where conventional military wisdom suggested failure was inevitable? The numbers simply didn't add up. 12 SEALs against 200 Taliban fighters should have resulted in American casualties regardless of air support. Yet Luna's intervention had not only prevented a catastrophe, but had done so with such devastating effectiveness that the enemy forces had been completely routed. "Captain," Colonel Voss said as the formal debriefing concluded, "what you accomplished today goes beyond exceptional airmanship. Those SEALs are alive because you chose to put yourself at maximum risk to ensure their survival. That's not training, that's character." Luna felt uncomfortable with the praise, not because she doubted its sincerity, but because she struggled to understand what made her actions different from those expected of any pilot in similar circumstances. Military aviators were trained to support ground forces, and the A-10 community in particular prided itself on close air support capabilities. She had simply done her job to the best of her abilities. "Ma'am, any pilot in the squadron would have done the same thing," she replied, though even as she spoke the words, she wondered if that was entirely true. Colonel Voss studied Luna's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Captain, I've been in this business for 30 years, and I can count on one hand the number of pilots who would have made the tactical decisions you made today. Most would have conducted safe, high-altitude attacks and called for backup when things got complicated. You chose to take the fight down to the deck and stay there until the job was finished." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Commander Morrison and 3 surviving members of his SEAL team. The Special Operations warriors still wore their combat gear, their faces bearing the distinctive thousand-yard stare that followed intense firefights. But their expressions when they looked at Luna carried something approaching reverence. "Captain Callahan," Morrison began, extending his hand with formal courtesy. "On behalf of Viper 6, I want to thank you for what you did out there. We owe our lives to your skill and courage." Luna shook his hand, nodding the firm grip and direct eye contact that characterized professional warriors. "Just doing my job, Commander. Glad we could get you out of there." Morrison shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that wasn't just doing your job. That was one pilot against 200 enemy fighters, and you made it look routine. Word's already spreading through the special operations community. Everybody's going to want to know about the A-10 pilot who saved Viper 6. As the SEALs departed for their own debriefing, Luna realized that her life had changed in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. The successful mission would generate reports, recommendations, and quite possibly medal nominations. But more importantly, she had earned something that couldn't be awarded or promoted: the respect of warriors who understood what it meant to face overwhelming odds and prevail through skill, courage, and determination. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Luna finally returned to her quarters, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, she was simply a pilot who had done her job exceptionally well, and 12 American heroes were alive because of decisions she had made in the crucible of combat. In the months that followed, Luna's mission would be analyzed by military professionals, studied by aviation tacticians, and eventually incorporated into the official curriculum for close air support training. Video recordings from her aircraft's targeting pod would become required viewing for A-10 pilots worldwide, demonstrating the aircraft's capabilities when employed by a pilot willing to accept maximum risk to ensure mission success. But the immediate impact was more personal and profound. Within weeks, Luna noticed subtle changes in how other pilots interacted with her. The casual dismissal and patronizing comments that had characterized her early months at the base were replaced by professional respect and genuine curiosity about her tactics and decision-making processes. She was invited to briefings previously considered above her pay grade, asked to provide input on mission planning, and consulted on matters of close air support doctrine. The transformation wasn't universal. Some pilots remained skeptical, attributing her success to luck rather than skill. But the majority of the squadron gradually came to understand that Luna Callahan possessed something that couldn't be taught in flight school or learned from